The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.
Good evening, I'm Joe Doolittle.
Good morning, I'm Kate Dudding.
And this is Story by Story.
Sharing the human experience, which is broadcast at many different times of the day, depending on what cable channel you're looking at, which is why we seem to be time fragmented here.
Yes, we've been time fragmented in the past, and we probably will be time fragmented in the future.
Yes.
What will be the same is we're going to spend an hour with you talking about stories and the art, certainly not a science, of storytelling. Because we're storytellers, and we're going to share some of the observations on what makes a good story. We're going to encourage you to come and listen to some of the storytelling programs that are in the area, and we're really going to encourage you, if you have any interest at all in sharing a story, to think about coming to those programs prepared to maybe tell.
Yes.
Because there's only one thing better than listening to a good story, and that's probably telling a story, unless you're really a little bit, want to listen more than you want to tell. I don't know how that works.
But sharing your stories with your family, those are really important. And depending on where you are in the circle of life, you may be the one who is the elder and should be sharing stories with the younger. Or if you're in the earlier part of the circle, you should be asking your elders, what was it like when you were my age? And because, well, when my son was in junior high, they were studying the 1970s. And so parents were brought in, and one of the parents said, "We're the living fossils."
The living fossils. I can use that, Kate. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.
My pleasure. That's really true. I've just spent the better part of a week before the Easter holiday with what I call bonus grandkids. Those are kids that are in our lives that really aren't our real grandkids. Then they're 5 and 7, and they visited for almost a week. And my wife is just a crafter and just can do things with kids. So I come in the house, and it's about 11 o'clock in the morning, and all of a sudden I hear squeals as you open the door, and I walk in the kitchen, and there on the kitchen counter, it is covered with slime.
Slime.
Do you know what slime is? Slime is a story in itself. It's made out of like Elmer's glue and something.
Borax, maybe.
And you put food coloring in, so they're all different colors. And they had plopped this stuff, and they were watching it flow very slowly around. And the 5-year-old had pushed his slime right to the edge of the counter, so it began to drip over the end. And there's all this stuff going on. And I said to myself, well, I'll never forget that slime. And I'm looking at that 5-year-old, and I'm thinking to myself, and thank goodness I don't think he'll ever forget that slime, and may tell his own kids about the day he covered Grandma's counter in slime. Now, you gotta say that it's a way of kind of helping retain a memory, and I'm getting of an age where remembering is becoming a challenge at times, not like slime at 5, but like where did I put my car keys and those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. So that's what story is about, and we'll share a little bit about stories that need to have stuff like a beginning and a middle, crisis, resolved, end, structure of story. So, Kate, we usually try to spend some time on the most interesting thing that you've been doing in storytelling. So what's that, anyway?
Well, you were there, Joe.
I'll remember in a minute, I'm sure.
We were at the New England Storytelling Conference, and we received the Brother Blue and Ruth Hill Award in recognition, and I'm quoting from the plaque, in recognition of extraordinary commitment, dedication, and loving encouragement to the storytelling community.
Wow. We did, didn't we?
Yes, we got that.
Wow. You know, this is actually a pretty big deal, and we're not trying to be arrogant in talking about it, but storytelling is a national effort, and we do have a regional group. And we were honored for you guys. Actually, we were honored for listeners and tellers that have come to programs that we've helped produce, and just make an image for storytelling. And I kind of knew we'd been nominated, and I didn't expect it because we were nominated a couple of years ago. So we were both in the back row, not sitting together. And when a mutual friend of ours, Motoko, who's been on the show, got up, and I said, well, Motoko could be the one, if anybody ever presented it, it would be her. And it was. And I don't think I've ever been prouder of being your co-producer than I was that night. That was just wonderful.
It was. I knew we'd been nominated, and I didn't ask Motoko. I had seen her the day before. I decided I'd rather be disappointed in a group rather than face to face.
Right.
And but I recognized that she was talking about us, and I went from wanting to burst into tears to getting my composure again, and then. But it recognized us, but it also recognized our local storytelling community, because while we produce events, we are not the only tellers at these events by any means. We have, I would say, 30 tellers who tell at these events.
50 members, 60 members in the guild. And one of the things that I really felt is that us, are usually in good company when you're at a storytelling event or a conference. So for us to get recognized for doing stuff that we love to do is a bonus. But I always felt we were in such good company with the local circle, with the Lanes group, and to be in the line of people who have been recognized in the name of Brother Blue Hill and his wife Ruth. And his story is interesting. He was a street minister in Cambridge, Massachusetts, who used stories to engage the whole spectrum of life in that fair city, to quote the car guys. Including the people at Harvard College, where he got his PhD, by the way. So he could appear to be a regular street minister, a person of color, building relationships with a homeless person, or he could be having coffee with the professor of preaching from the Harvard Divinity School. And in maintaining his perception and his listening ability, he did a lot for a lot of people. And like his wife, who was also an archivist at Radcliffe. Wonderful people, and to be recognized in the community of the group of storytellers in their names is truly humbling.
And what they also did was they held a storytelling open mic every Tuesday night for, I think, 30 years.
30 years in downtown Cambridge.
Yeah. And Brother Blue has died, Ruth is elderly, and other people have taken it over, and so it continues in Cambridge. So that's a real commitment to storytelling.
And it was just wonderful. So that's what we've been really. We were just a couple of weeks ago. We were in Amherst at the Sharing the Fire, great name for a storytelling conference, and we were privileged to be there. Yes. So congratulations, Kate.
Congratulations. Good work.
Good work. We're going to do a little segue. We're going to have, the format is we usually do something like we've done, talking in general about storytelling. We don't get an award every month. And then we have a guest teller who's going to feature some stories and a little bit of her own perspective on storytelling. And Fran Berger is with us tonight, and she's from Castleton, lives down the river. Living down the river is better than being up the river. But,
or kicking the bucket.
Kicking the bucket. And Fran, it's so nice to have you here.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
And you have a wonderful, wonderful gallery of experience. Most recently, you're a healer. You're a massage therapist.
Massage therapist and a Reiki master.
And you're a Reiki master. And you share that with my son Josh. That's
Yes.
kind of fun. That's kind of good stuff.
It is good stuff.
But you have an accent that doesn't sound like you're from around here.
That's because I'm from rural Oklahoma.
Tornado Alley.
Absolutely.
Rural Oklahoma.
Yep.
Wow. Now, growing up, did you grow up on a ranch out there? Were you kind
Nope,
of in
we
that
grew
kind
up
of
on
country?
the edge of town, but when I was about 10 or so, my dad started rescuing horses from the local county. Someone would call him and say, Earl, this animal's not being fed, or this animal might be abused. And my dad would go out and talk to the farmer, give him 2 weeks before he brought the sheriff. And he said, I'll be back in 2 weeks and you will have a choice. You'll change the way you treat your animal, or I'll call the sheriff, or you'll give me the animal. Now that's the way it is. And so we started off with a blood bay quarter horse who was starved almost to death, and I thought she was a piece of tin in the pasture when I saw her.
Wow.
I said, what's that? Dad said, that's a horse, be careful, she's skittish. And she was the first of many.
Wow.
And he was a natural vet, so he'd heal him back to health, and he taught us all to ride, and there were 8 of us, and how to care for horses.
So your dad was a horse whisperer kind of guy?
My dad was a cowboy
He was a cowboy.
on the Chapman Barnard Ranch in the Dirty 30s, the biggest ranch in all of Oklahoma. In fact, that's where Howard Hughes went to get his horses, and it's also where he came to solicit cowboys for his films.
Oh, really?
And my dad was one of 3 cowboys that hung together, and one of them was Ben Johnson Jr., who went with Howard Hughes at the beginning of World War II. And he said, Earl, why don't you come with me? And my dad said, no, I just signed up for the Army. I'm going to Puerto Rico, and I'm going to train down there amongst the senoritas. So he went off to World War II, and Ben Johnson went to be backup in more than 300 films and worked a lot with John Ford.
Wow.
Yep.
That's a story, and you didn't even mean to tell it, right?
Yeah.
I never knew that before.
And the Nature Conservancy bought a good chunk of the Chapman Barnard Ranch, and their headquarters is the bunkhouse where my dad was a cowboy, and his name is on the plaque as one of the cowboys from the Chapman Barnard Ranch. Yep.
Really?
Yep.
Now, was he a storyteller too? Where did you acquire the storyteller image, or how did that happen?
I can see how you're healing.
Yeah.
You know,
The
you have
Reiki.
roots.
Oh, yes.
Her
Both my
father was a
grandmothers
Reiki
were
master, but
healers.
didn't know it.
Pardon?
Your father was probably a Reiki master. He just didn't know it.
Oh, yeah. My mama was really the one. She'd sit and talk your night over and rub your back, all 8 of us. And her mother was a healer, and my father's mother was a healer.
Wow.
So they were natural healers, and my great aunt and uncle were a husband-wife, midwife team in the Oklahoma Territory on a buckboard.
Wow.
So it came naturally.
Wow.
And as for storytelling, I listened to my grandparents, and I'd ask them to tell me stories about when they were kids. And Dad would sit out on the back porch and smoke a cigarette in the night and try to be alone. But I'd sidle up and say, Daddy, tell me a story when you were a kid. And so I actually have one of those.
Oh, really?
And I don't know. You tell me when I'm ready.
I think
that's a
the
perfect
lead-up.
segue. We're going to have a story, and it'll be probably about Oklahoma. And we're so grateful that you're here with us, Fran.
Well, I'm grateful to be here. Thank you.
And we're going to listen to your story.
And before we do, I just want to say I was there to watch you receive the Brother Blue and Ruth Hill Award, and I could not be happier. These 2 have earned this, have done so very much for storytelling in the Capital District. I'm proud to be part of Story Circle of the Capital District and part of the work that you do.
Well,
So,
thank you, Fran. It's that affirmation is just wonderful, and we appreciate it. And I appreciated you actually driving home in the snow with me that night. That was kind of
No
a really nice
worries.
thing with the carpool over the hill, so to speak.
Well, we learned to do a little bit of everything in Oklahoma,
right.
include driving from tractors to trucks to buses.
It showed. It showed.
This is a story from, let me see, Dad was born in 1913. This would be 1923. Now, my grandparents settled in Osage County in Oklahoma, where they built their farm, and that's northeast Oklahoma, very, very hilly country. And it had not been a kind year for the crops, it had not been a kind year for food, and it had not been a kind year for income. So Grandpa and Dad, who was all of 10 years old, they set, and he was the eldest child, they set out with their guns to go hunting. They went for a week of camping and hunting to see what they could bring home to help fill the larder for the winter. Well, it was on about 4 days into this trip, and it was a late afternoon, and it had been a disappointing day. All they got was a couple of rabbits and a squirrel or two. Hardly enough to put in the bag, but, you know, hungry enough not to leave them laying there. And it was getting cloudy. It was October. It was a bright October day. They'd gone hunting, and they'd had a couple of really bright days. But it started to cloud over that afternoon. The winds had picked up, and it looked like rain was on the way. So Grandpa and Dad were looking for a place to camp, when all of a sudden, wow! Wow! Came the screams. And the hills of northeast Oklahoma are full of black panthers. And that indeed was a panther scream. And though Grandpa tended to be a bit grumpy and go ahead, and Daddy would dawdle behind so as not to get yelled at, he scooted up to Grandpa, and Grandpa said, "Stay close, Earl. The panthers are out." Now, when the panthers are out, you don't just look around, you have to look up, because they like to climb in the trees, and they can jump you from above. Fortunately, that sound was far enough away that Grandpa knew full well they were still safe, but they had to keep moving, trying to find a place. Now they had to have a shelter out of the rain, and because they're not going to be able to keep a fire going all night to keep the panthers away. Because sure enough, it started spitting a little. So Grandpa said, "Come on, let's go. Let's see if we can find some hunter's cabin. We got to find something." And Dad moved as fast as he could and stayed very close. All of a sudden, wow! Much louder. That panther scream was so close, Grandpa stopped and said, "Hold up." Boom! 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 He fired some shots. Silence. No screaming. "That'll hold him for a while, Earl. Let's keep moving." It got darker and darker as the clouds gathered and the rain started coming down seriously. Dad was shivering, not just from the cold and the wind, but the thought of those panthers coming down on him. Grandpa kept moving and said, "Wait a minute, I see a clearing up here, Earl. You see anything?" And Dad scooted ahead, and across the clearing he said, "Dad, I think that's a cabin." Wow! It was so close, Grandpa shot 4. Bam, 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 bam. Silence, but he knew it wouldn't be long. That rain was coming down hard. The panthers didn't mind. They could move and they could see. He grabbed Dad's hand and he pulled him across that clearing. And before they knew it, they were up on a rickety porch. And there it was. It was a cabin, all right. The door was sagging. But Grandpa dragged Pop in there. He pulled that door up and he pushed it into the doorway. He found a piece of wood and he put it across and held it as best he could. And a couple of the windows, there were windows to shoot out. I'm sure it was a hunter's cabin. And he found some wood inside and he poked it up against the windows, trying to keep those panthers out. Thank goodness there was a fireplace, dusty and nasty looking as it was, and there was some old furniture, and Grandpa said, "Earl, get busy, we got to break up the furniture." But Dad was cuddled and snugged up against him. "Spiders, spiders." And sure enough, there were webs everywhere. And my dad hated spiders. He'd been bit by a black widow and lost a chunk of skin out. And he knew how nasty it felt. He says, Earl, just take this stick and gather the webs. Now, that's the last thing Dad wanted to do, but he did as he was told. Grandpa was not to be refused. So he gathered all those webs around and threw it into the fire, which Grandpa had gone over to start while he was busy. And then they broke up some more furniture, and they found over in the dusty corner just a few logs that had been left from somebody previous, so they had enough. They had enough to stay warm. And they pulled out some cold jerky and biscuits, some dry hardtack, and Grandpa poured some water. That was dinner. Well, they were tired. It might not be 9 o'clock at night yet, but it had been a long day. And Grandpa had them take their jackets off and dry them near the fire. They laid their bedrolls out, and down they laid. Grandpa snored a bit. Dad all of a sudden heard, wow! Wow! That really scared him, and he snuggled closer to Grandpa. Grandpa all of a sudden sat up. There was a light out there, a light. That meant there was another person out there with the Panthers. Earl, move now. I gotta open that door. And so he moved the wood off and took that door and set it aside. And sure enough, through the woods there was a lantern coming. But that person wasn't alone. Wow! Wow! Over here! Grandpa yelled, but he knew he wouldn't be heard. That light was still too far away. But thank goodness it was still swinging toward the cabin. It was getting closer and closer to the cabin. So he waited and he waited a little bit, and wow! The Panthers were getting near that lantern. That meant that person was in danger. Over here! So what Grandpa did, he went bam! He fired a shot up in the air so the person would know where to go. So the lantern swung closer and closer and closer, coming out of the woods. And wow! And Grandpa, bam, bam, shot another couple of shots. Panthers quieted. The lantern came closer and quicker and closer and quicker. Dad was holding on to Grandpa's leg, looking out there. Are they going to make it? Are they going to make it, Pa? Yeah, they're not going to come after those shots. And here it comes closer and closer and closer until it comes into the clearing. And Grandpa uttered a swear word under his breath, turned as white as a sheet, and he yanked Dad back in that cabin and slammed the door across. Dad said, "What are you doing? That person will be eaten by panthers." Earl, get yourself back in your bedroll. There wasn't a person. What? Grandpa sat there and shook. Dad leaned against him all night. Grandpa kept that gun across his lap, leaned up against the wall of that cabin. And sure enough, they got out there the next morning, and in the muddy clearing in front of that cabin, there were no footprints. But in the middle of that, there sat a burnt-out lantern. And they searched like the good hunters they were back into those woods, and never did they find a footprint. And from that day forward, Grandpa avoided that area of the woods. And Dad swore that was a true story. And the next time I asked, and the next time I asked, he didn't change it. So I'm reckoning that was the panther and the lantern and the ghost of God knows who.
Whoa. 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 Thank you.
You're welcome.
And your father told you that story on the back porch.
trying to smoke a cigarette and be alone, but he didn't make it.
But then he went screaming back into the house. So his mission was accomplished.
Did he do the panther screams too?
I don't remember. Yes, he did, because I wouldn't know how to do it, except for the fact that we lived along the river, and we'd have panthers escape from the Oklahoma City Zoo. It happened 3 times while I was growing up. Black bear and twice panthers. They'd follow the rivers up. We lived right on the mighty Shikaska, so I heard real panther screams because we had horses in the back, and one night we had to go bring the horses into the barn because the panthers were too close, and Dad wasn't going to feed them to the big cats.
Wow.
Yep. So I do believe he did, because I had to learn it somewhere.
Wow. That's
I'm not thrilled with bats flying over my head at sundown, but panthers in the trees. Oh my
well.
word!
The other thing that you do so very well, other than the panther scream but your movement in the story, and you're sitting down. So I imagine if you're standing up, it would have been even more apparent. But the looking up at the trees and just the going after the cobwebs and the wood, it's almost magical to see you move.
Well, the thing that I love most about storytelling is that whatever the story is, once I learn it, I'm inside it. I'm living that story. And when I work with kids on teaching storytelling, I have them think about where they were, what it smelled like, what it felt like, if they ate something, what it tasted like, what everything looked like. Was it hot? Was it cold? What were you wearing? How did the clothes feel? Just so you really, really have proprioception, which is what we call it in the healing world, or a physical awareness of movement and feeling, and awareness of your senses around you and from within you. And that is something that my parents were very expressive people, and they talked with their hands a lot. And we used to say, she couldn't talk if you tied her hands down.
My uncle said that about me, but not really in a nice way.
Well, poobah on him.
Yes.
There's probably a gene for that in your family.
Yeah, they're called Lee and Wranglers in Oklahoma.
Oh, geez.
Yeah,
I got it in passing. It caught me. It was really good. Now, you mentioned that he told it several times. Do you remember the first time you heard it?
Yes,
I do. The last time you heard it?
First time I do remember, I was probably no more than 10 years old. And I remember leaning into him and grabbing his upper arm because I was so scared of the panthers. And he had to kind of peel my fingers off so I didn't squeeze them too tight. Yes.
Well, it did seem to me that there was a whole section where I wasn't breathing.
I was holding my breath, too. I think you're right.
Well, a 10-year-old gets mighty scared. And when the big, strong grandpa, or father in that case, got frightened, that was enough to keep Dad awake, rolling his eyes all night. And my dad he was very expressive. He would roll his eyes telling stories and look at you to get you spooked. So
the one thought I had, and I had a couple of, one of the things about a good story is that if it generates some thoughts about your own spot, then that's what I call kind of it being generative, because it's generating another whole storyline. So I was beginning to go there in terms of experience of just hiking with my dad, and then I realized in a way that if your dad was 10, then your grandpa was probably like maybe in his mid-30s, something like that. So he wasn't an old person, he was an adult.
Yep.
But he was, and I thought about, the fact that here's this 10-year-old and this younger, older person
right
in this cabin, and the grown-up, if you will, the guy with the gun, isn't that
Not that
seasoned
old.
either, so then I began to think about what he was thinking about, like, holy crow, why did I bring my kid out here? Kind of thing.
Well, I mean, he probably was more seasoned than
Probably a regular
30-year-old
today. It's true.
When
Today.
we were 30, because he had a whole family
Right.
to keep from starving to death.
Yeah, that's true.
Plus, he had received from the Homestead Act. Oklahoma still was running it. You could get 700 acres, and if you worked them 5 years in a row with good crops, the land was yours. So he had to. My grandmother moved into a sod house at the age of 13. They didn't live together as husband and wife till she was 15. But in that time, they built a farm and they built a house.
Wow.
So by the time he was 30, he had a number of children, had built a farm, built a house, and had done a lot more work than many of us ever do in a lifetime.
So he probably was more 45. Looked for probably that old.
I'm sure he did by then.
Because he had lived such a hard life.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is literally from the ground up. Yeah, work the earth, build the home, bring up the family, and teach them as you go.
It's not the years that matter, it's the miles.
That's right.
Yes.
And there's a quote from Abe Lincoln that says, it's not the years in your life, it's the life in your years.
The life in your years. There you go.
right.
There you go. Well, Fran, I just have to thank you for that. That was just a... Now,
You're welcome.
I have one other question that comes to mind. Now, when you told your own kids that story, what was that like?
Well,
What's it like to tell that story?
well, it was awesome. I'll tell you, I'll actually go back to last July to a family reunion. There were 7 little girls and a little boy sitting opposite me at a picnic table like this. And I taught them panther screams and said, when I do a panther scream, you do a panther scream. And when they weren't screaming like panthers, they were like this. And when my daughter was a little girl, about 7, and I told her that one, she was like this. And then she wanted me to tell it to her friends because I had only one daughter at the time, but I've told nieces and nephews, and even my sisters and brothers are like this. And it's interesting because not everyone sat with Dad to ask him to tell me a story when you were a kid.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of stories they don't have.
Oh, wow.
But you are sharing.
Of course I do. Yeah. I put them on CDs and send them out all over the family.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to just take a little break maybe. We'll come back to some of your stories and your storytelling in a minute. But, you know, we're in the middle of spring now, Kate. Is there stuff still going on in storytelling?
Of course there is. Well, our seasons have stopped at both the Glenn Sanders Mansion, where we have Story Sundays, and at Proctor's. There's still some things going on. And oh my goodness, I'm the first featured performer on the first event at we've got a theme here. First Tuesday Tales and Stuff. Open mic for storytelling, music, and spoken word. I will be the featured performer on Tuesday, obviously, May 5th.
May 5th.
Telling stories of mothers. My good friend Joe asked me to do this.
Well, and that probably is going to be a little bit of a celebration of sharing the fire and our award. We haven't worked out the logistics on that, but we may have to bring back, what was the name of the cake that we had when you did your Julia Child thing?
Saba. It's the Queen of Sheba cake.
We're going to have chocolate cake.
Yeah.
Is that what we're going to do?
Renda Saba, I think.
If you come,
Yes, Queen of Sheba. Renda Saba. There we go.
At any rate, I think,
Julia Child.
I think we're going to need something that a mother would have baked, and I think that was a great recipe. And I had a friend that did that once when Kate did a program on Julia Child. So, at any rate, and Arthur's Market is in downtown Schenectady in the historic Stockade. It'll be May. It's May, so it'll be a lovely evening. It'll be light outside, and we just share a lot of wonderful fellowship as our featured teller and other tellers and poets and musicians share their art and craft. And so please join us for that. It's going to be fun.
Then the second Friday, which is the end of that week because
Right.
May
Where
8th.
the calendars can be just, challenges.
Yes, depending on where the months start. Shawnee Evenings, the second Friday of the month at the Irish American Heritage Museum in downtown Albany. The life and story of Jean Robert Foster with Eileen Egan Mack.
And this is a great venue and a great story. Eileen Egan Mack was an essayist and a writer. No?
Jean Robert Foster.
Jean Robert was.
Yes.
Okay. Anyway, she was from Warrensburg, but she was a contemporary and a compatriot of William Butler Yeats and his dad, and the whole story of how her life informed her spirit and her vision and her legacy is a wonderful story, and Eileen just does it beautifully. So please join us for that in a wonderful place. And at intermission, you get soda bread. Ooh. Great soda bread. One of the board members of the museum actually is a connoisseur of soda bread, and he provides that as his gift to the evening. So.
Then the next week up in Saratoga at the storytelling open mic there at Cafe Lena, Carol Conley will be our featured teller.
And that's a wonderful venue too. If you've not been at Cafe Lena, it's the oldest continually operated coffee house, as in I was going to say beatnik 60s coffee house, but also in the tradition of Samuel Johnson and the London coffee houses. So it's a great spot. Plan on being there if you can.
Yes, and it's a very modest fee, and they make warm cookies. Only $1.
And there's a great Thai restaurant right across the street.
I did have breakfast, but anyways. Then the next night, let's see, where are we now? We're back in Albany. The Interfaith Story Circle of the Tri-City area is having their monthly meeting. The theme is Acquiring Knowledge, and that will be led by Rabbi Dan Ornstein.
And the web page is up for the Interfaith Story Circle, and for those of you who are at all interested in kind of an ecumenical approach to some of the religious history and faith beliefs, this is a great group to plug into. Each month there's a session, and it's in a different community of faith. So I never would have been in a mosque or a Hindu temple if it hadn't been for this group. So I encourage you to take advantage of that opportunity. They are a wonderful resource.
Mm-hmm. And where will it be?
It will be at the Ohav Shalom Synagogue on New Crumkill Road, or across the street. At the moment, that's it. You can check with the website for an updated one.
It's easy to find. It's just off of Route 85's bypass. When you get off at Crumkill Road, you take the right, and it'll be right there.
On the left.
On the left, yeah.
Right, take a look. Yeah. Then down in Saugerties, the next night, which is the third Friday of the month, Janet Carter has a monthly series there at the Inquiring Minds bookstore. The guest teller will be Robin Beatty from Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. And they meet beforehand, meet to eat at that same block. And you can email us if you want any more details on any of these things anytime.
Right.
Then on that would be the third Tuesday of the month, we'll have our next Story Circle meeting right here at Colonie Town Library, 6:30 to 8:30, sharing stories, telling, not reading, please. We can read the coming attractions, but not the stories.
Well, and please be encouraged to, of all the performance venues we've talked about, or sharing venues, the Story Circle gathering is really intended for people who are kind of looking at learning more about storytelling to show up, experiment, tell a story, and more seasoned tellers tell stories that they would like to get some feedback on. So it's a great learning and introduction environment, and we encourage new folks to show up.
Or if you just want to listen, that's fine too. That if storytellers don't have listeners, they're just talking out loud to themselves, and that's generally frowned upon in this culture.
That's why they make showers and bathrooms.
And always, there's over 100 stories on our website. Go to storycircle@proctors.org and click on YouTube. Stories that have been taken from previous TV shows, mostly. And when television doesn't have anything on worth watching, come join us and wallow in stories.
Pick a story. Well, thank you, Kate. And there's certainly a lot going on, and our website, Story Circle at Proctors, has even more resources if you're interested, or if in the run of things you forget one, all the schedule is there as well. Oh, wow. Well, Fran, we're not only are we pleased to hear, I've kind of had those experiences of story of kind of generating my own little thoughts as I listened to you. I didn't mean that I wasn't paying attention, but But I was kind of like those kids. I mean, and I love the image of the kids on the picnic tables learning how to do their whatever.
Though I was wondering if their parents. I just recalled that we were visiting friends once who gave our son a duck call.
I have a.
And our friends lived in Ohio, and so we had a long ride home. And the fellow liked to torment me, tease me, and
Gave your kid a duck call.
but I think gave him instructions that was not to be used in the car. You can use it outside or in your bedroom. Give them choices. Just don't say don't.
Well, at least he hadn't given him a drum or something. You know, there it could have been worse. You know. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyways, how did? Sorry, I was wondering that people were saying, no, yes, do those. You can practice your panther screams outside or in the basement.
Well, these were my grandnieces and grandnephews. So my nieces and nephews, though they weren't at the picnic table, were right behind those children doing the same thing.
Doing the same thing.
So I'm guessing maybe they practice a panther scream or two.
Yeah, you didn't ask us to do that, but it's probably a little overwhelming on a recording.
I wouldn't do it as well as Fran. I'm sure.
Or it just takes practice.
Let me go up another little road. When did you step in front of a picnic table and tell stories? When did you become a storyteller in an aware way, as opposed to sharing a joke on the school bus or something like that?
Well, I would say when I became a mom, when I became a parent, I think is when I wanted to make sure that stories I'd heard growing up didn't disappear. So I started telling stories, and I grew up in Tornado Alley. My house was blown away when I was 3 years old. My twin and I saw a ball of red lightning go through our room, which we thought, because we were 3 years old, was a red fire engine. For years and years and years we thought it was. But it was St. Elmo's fire.
Wow.
St. Elmo's fire is well known in old sailing ships because it would travel up and down the masts, and sometimes it would land and light the ship afire. And usually it's above waters. There's a river behind us, and very, very few people have survived being very close to St. Elmo's fire. But it blew through our house as our house imploded. If you have all your windows down for a tornado, the pressure is such that a house will implode on itself rather than explode out. And that shot through the living room and through our bedroom, and we were sitting and watching it together, and the next thing we knew, the winds tore us apart. I was buried under our front porch, which ran the length of the house. My arm was broken here and here. My youngest brother was 3 months old in one of those big overstuffed 50s chairs in a woven basket kind of cradle. The floor fell out from underneath him. He was covered in insulation and would be dead had his bedding not whirled around him and formed a little air pocket, a little air balloon, and he was not touched or scratched. And as soon as that St. Elmo's fire went through and shot the wall and everything imploded. Now this is something I learned as growing up because I didn't know what happened. And we were pulled apart. The house was imploding at that time. Most of my siblings have scars from flying glass, from being down like this, because there were French windows in the house that went. My twin has scars on her back. And apparently my sister said I dug myself out of the rubble, my oldest sister, because we were found holding hands walking down the road several hours later. The storm hit at 9:05 at night, and all people with small children had them in bed, and there were no early warning systems at that time, and most people did not have storm cellars. This was the biggest recorded storm cell with multiple tornadoes and the most unusual recorded lightning in the history of the United States still. I lived in Boulder, Colorado, and at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Center there at NOAA. You go up on the hill and there's a film about our tornado showing the most unusual lightning ever recorded. Flash lightning, streak lightning, and yellow, blue, green, white ball of the St. Elmo's fire. Never recorded anywhere else before. It was the first time University of Oklahoma and University of Kansas had planted sensors from southern Oklahoma to mid-Kansas to record lightning flashes, and it was the most powerful lightning storm ever recorded. So that was our storm. It was
and you were
just
three.
Awesome. We were 3. And the reason I tell this story and tell you about St. Elmo's fire is that if you're ready for me to, it leads right into the story about my dad and the night that he didn't go to the storm cellar.
Well, before you tell us the story, can you just finish this up? None of your family was killed in this episode?
Well, now that's interesting. Our neighbor too, if you're looking out toward the front this way, our house was destroyed. 7 of the 8 of us were alive at the time. Nobody was killed. My next oldest brother was across town at my grandmother's house. He helped her get into the storm cellar. She was 88. And she pulled the door shut, and then she said, "Oh, no, you have to look for Mabel." And he said, "But Grandma, the storm's blowing hard." She said, "Wait for a quiet minute. Look for Mabel." And that was her neighbor. And my brother lifted up that storm door, and he looked out, and there she was, struggling to open her storm cellar. And the wind came up, and my brother watched her get pulled away. The tornado pulled her and took her. He slammed that shut and bolted it. They were in there for 3 days. My grandmother had stored kerosene for the lantern. She had a slop bucket, and she'd stored water, and they survived 3 days down there. They did not die. She had a stroke and died. That was in May, the following December. But my next door neighbor, she sat in her rocker all the time. She was pretty deaf. She didn't really hear the storm. And they found her the next day floating on one of her doors in that rocker with a 2x4 through her.
Ooh.
But none of us was killed. But our home was totally destroyed.
Wow.
And we were
with
dispensed.
that background,
Yeah.
thank you for. I thought other people would be curious about the storm, but you've got another storm story, and let's hear that.
Oh, you mean how tornadoes came to be, or the?
No, you're the one about your
about your father.
About my father, yeah. Yes, yep. This is affectionately called Hit the Hole. So it was just a few years after the tornado, and my mother was a nervous wreck. And we had a newly installed early warning storm system, which went off all the time because in north central Oklahoma, literally Tornado Alley, we had so many tornadoes come through that you had to go to the storm cellar from March through September at least 15 to 20 times. And it was no joke. School was let out. They'd sound the signals. They were hoping that they had 30 minutes from the time school let out for people to get home and get into a shelter. And my dad was hardworking, had 8 kids, didn't get a lot of privacy or a lot of rest. And my mother was such a nervous Nellie that she just, as the weather got bad, before the whistles went off, she'd pack everybody down to the storm cellar, knowing the whistles were going to go off. But my dad would have none of it. He said, "Myrtle, I'm not going down in that hole again. I won't do it." And she said, "Earl, we've got to go." This was a day when we'd had thunderstorm after thunderstorm after thunderstorm. And the radio from Oklahoma City, because we had those little transistor radios on all the time. We had bags of batteries. We had kerosene, we had water, we had slop jars. Sometimes we had 39, 40 people down there in that storm cellar my dad built. It was lined with bunk beds and benches. And there were double sets of bunk beds and sets of benches and some chairs and a table down there to hold the lanterns, etc. And on top, there at the top of the stairs, my dad had built a door that opened and a covering, and then a door at the bottom that you entered. And that night, my dad had his favorite TV shows coming on. Cheyenne was coming on, Sugarfoot was coming on, Maverick was coming on, and he wasn't going to go anywhere. And by golly, he talked Mom into going ahead and making dinner. And we served up dinner and cleared to the kitchen. And then the storm really started hitting hard, and the whistles went off. No time to wash the dishes. Mom grabbed us and went to the cellar, hollering back over her shoulder, "Earl, get down here, come on." Dad said, "H-E double hockey sticks, no, I'm not going, Myrtle, I'm not going to that hole. You take the kids." So he sat in there with the television on. Now, at that time, there was no such thing as cable. We had an antenna. Well, an antenna is a little more than a lightning rod, if you think about it. So there we were, down in the storm cellar, and all of a sudden the door opened, and another family came in, and then another family came in, and we're listening to that radio, and the storm cell's moving closer, and it's a line of tornadoes. It's not just a tornado, it's a whole line of them. And the lightning is just so fierce, and it caused a lot of fires. I mean, we had a lot of streak lightning that hit hard. Lots of stories about that, but nonetheless, back to this night. By the time it was 10 o'clock and time for the late news, we had 38 people in there, and nobody was going anywhere. The whistles kept sounding again and again. Dad still wasn't here. All of a sudden, we hear a loud boom, and we know something's been hit. It could have been a telephone pole. It could be power outages, the whole place. What we didn't know is that our house had been hit. Fortunately, it hit the antenna instead of the roof, but it went and boom, it blew the TV up. Thank God Dad was across the room because the glass flew by him and he got a cut on his cheek, but he didn't get blown with it. He yanked that cord out of the wall and he ran down and grabbed that upper door, and as he grabbed that upper door, he saw that lightning shoot through our house, right past him. And we had these great big old iron T-poles with the lines for clotheslines, to hang your clothes. It hit that pole, it shot down those wires, it shot through that second pole and down into the ground next to that storm cellar. Dad's hair was all standing up, and it smelled burnt. And my brother opened up that bottom door, and he ran up and he jerked Daddy down into the storm cellar and ran up and closed that top door. And that wind howled and whistled, and that tornado went on for another couple of hours. Before that, maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, we emptied out. And Dad was burnt and frizzled and had a cut on his cheek. And you know what? The next time those whistles blew, my dad grabbed everybody and yelled, "Hit the hole!" And from that time on, that became the call for the storms. Hit the hole! And that's the night that Daddy blew up a TV.
Holy crow.
Nothing like a stubborn Okie.
Nothing like a stubborn Okie. Man,
A learning tale.
So the cowboy wanted to watch his cowboy shows on TV.
Well, Maverick
Sure
was
enough,
a fine show.
Well,
And so was Sugarfoot and Cheyenne.
I don't remember them as well.
Oh, I
remember
remember all of them,
Maverick,
Yeah.
Maybe because Maverick was on more reruns than I did.
Yes.
oh man. So when how old were you when that happened?
Oh, mercy. Let's see. I'm not sure. Maybe anywhere from 8 to 12. I don't really recall exactly. Somewhere in there.
So you were about the same age as your dad was when he was out hunting with his father, that you experienced the story of Hit the Hole.
Yep. Yep, he gave me a memory to share.
Well, I'll say.
So, are houses built now with basements that act as cellar holes, or?
Well, what they've done, because basements are not really practical there, there's an awful lot of sand and clay, and it fills up and holds water. What they tend to do is build a storm cellar you can get right outside to. There are a few places that are high enough to get basements. There was a lot of flooding from the river, and we were in kind of a low-lying turf. So it was better that Dad kind of built a hill up. He and my uncle spent some time creating that place, kind of building it up, and then
A bunker.
yeah, and it's like a bunker. And my nephew from Oklahoma just came to stay with us, and he just bought a house that was completely concrete. The wall, not studs, it was concrete, and the basement was concrete. It was built to withstand an F4.
Ooh.
Now, on the Fujita scale, F5 is the highest level and the strongest tornado. That's what hit in 1955. It took our town in Udall, Kansas out, and had that wild lightning. His structure will withstand an F4, and a good thing he's got 6 kids in there. So that's it's built a lot of consciousness since then, since the town was destroyed.
That I went to Cincinnati on business, and I was taking the elevator to the next floor to, I guess, go to the cafeteria, and it said, storm shelter or tornado shelter on the bottom floor or something. Oh, okay, I'll remember that.
Our junior high and high school were built with a level below tornado shelters. So the hallways were all marked tornado shelter, and people from all the neighborhoods would come by if we were had a storm going on, and they would go down in there in the tunnels there for the storm shelter. Yeah.
Don't have those in Connecticut.
No, not here either.
Maybe hurricane. No, we didn't have hurricane shelters, but we dealt more with hurricanes than with tornadoes. Well, hurricanes every 5 to 6 years.
God knows how.
Yeah.
How often we'll have them now.
Yeah.
Now the family gathering, I'm just thinking that the kinds of stories that you've shared with us are your family stories. And when people look at the use of story, they might not say, well, what's story all about? But you've actually used your abilities to archive things from the family's heritage, really. Do you share these among the family? I mean, do their kids are there people that tell the same stories that you tell to, in like Ashtabula or wherever they're living?
Yes, because what I've done is at every family reunion, I bring more CDs of family stories and distribute them. And so the kids will say to me, I wore my CD out, can you make me another CD of these stories? Or can you make me another CD of those stories? Or I heard about this story, can you tell it? I don't think it's on your CD. So, yep, I do it by CD distribution. And if I'm asked, I'll tell it at a reunion.
Well, that's great.
Is your twin a storyteller?
Oh, she doesn't do it as much as I do, but yes, she's really good. She worked with her son's Boy Scout troop and did storytelling with them. And they tended to do more ghost stories, and she was mad scientist for them, and she's very, very expressive as well. I'm the only one who's pursued it as a storyteller.
Well, unfortunately, we just have time to say goodbye, and thank you, Fran, for joining us
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
and giving us these hair-raising tales.
Quite literally.
Yes.
And a little bit of science in the story, a little bit of San Elmo's fire and weather and biology, whatever that was. But it was a great hour. If you think this is a great hour, please think about checking our web and coming to one of the storytelling programs that we featured, or just being in touch.
Thank you.
And I just want to add, you can see after listening to that listing how very important these two are to storytelling in the Capital District, and how very much they do for us and how hard they worked. God bless you.
There you go.
God bless you.
Thank you. Good night.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning